talk about all the different kinds of financing. We're going to, it's a lot to talk about, but we'll try to cram it into a short amount of time. But if you could kind of tell us what you do, and then what kind of forms of financing, or in what way, why would you be on a financing panel? I guess is a way to say that. So starting with you.
My name is Glenn Reynolds. My company is Circus Road Films. We're primarily a film sales company, mostly specializing in selling U.S. rights for independent films that are finished. But we also have pre-sold U.S. rights to distributors to help financing. We can talk a little bit about what that means. We've been in business for 8 years. Before that, I have a bit of a background in international sales for other companies. I've worn the producer hat 17 times now, so I've produced as well. So I've felt that pain of trying to find money myself. And
so you would be coming at this panel as an independent producer yourself and having to go out and find that financing as opposed to a financier having to provide it or whatever.
Correct. Yeah, I have my own projects that I try to find money for different ways, through equity participants, through pre-selling rights to distributors so we can go to a bank and finance that paper, through tax credits from different territories. So I've done that, but I also have people coming to me with their projects saying, hey, we've got these things in place. Do you think you can find a distributor who can pre-buy the movie?
And all that stuff you just said, if you're like, I don't know what he was just saying, we're gonna have someone on this panel explain all those things to you, because it is a little bit of like Chinese if you've never heard it. So Viviana, let's hear what you.
Sure. My name is Viviana Zaragoitia. I'll try and project as much as I can. I work for 3 Point Capital. We are primarily a tax credit financier for film and TV, and we also are sort of expanding to lend on distribution contracts as well, if you have those. I used to work at Lionsgate, and my background was profit participation. The company's been around for 5 years. We have an office here in California, one in New York, and we just opened one in Louisiana to kind of take advantage of all the productions that are going on down there. And part of the reason to come to a panel like this and speak is to kind of just raise awareness of the fact that there are companies such as ours that exist that can cash flow your incentive for you if you shoot in a state or a country that has that. And just kind of talk about the different types of lending that we do specifically for entertainment that are sometimes a little bit untraditional, that are aside from getting equity from going to a bank. That kind of we deal with maybe smaller budgets, just kind of raise awareness about it.
And we'll have her talk about what that means, that cash flowing a tax credit, and going in depth about that, because that's certainly a very popular form of financing. And then why you want to tell us?
Yeah, so my name's Carl Iho. I actually recently moved over to Lionsgate this week, so I don't have much to talk about that, but I'm primarily here to talk about bank financing for independent films. So what we do pretty much, we work with professionals like what Glenn used to do in international sales. They make pre-sales, and with those distribution contracts, they come to a bank and we basically finance those contracts. And we also do what Viviana does. We also finance tax credits in various states and countries. And then we also provide gap financing, and that's when both the equity, the pre-sales, and the tax credits fall short of the budget. And we also lend against unsold estimates, and that's what we call gap financing.
Jeff?
I'm not really sure what I'm doing here. They just offered me in water and water because I like it. No, but seriously, I've pretty much done what everybody else in the panel has done. I run a company called Waterstone Entertainment. We have distribution, scripted and unscripted entertainment for TV, feature film development. We put up equity for feature films, finishing funds. I physically produce my own movies and TV shows and developed and packaged them in every phase. So I'm pretty much sort of a mix of everything. I've never worked in the banking world. Did not go to school for it. Started my first company when I was 18. Worked with this guy next, and then started Waterstone about 4.5 years ago with an investor from Texas who's a real estate developer. So we just started a new distribution company. We're acquiring our first film in Toronto. That's going to be announced soon, but we pretty much do everything. So any questions you have in any form, I can probably answer. I also help pass the tax incentives in Massachusetts, where I'm from. I brought in Departed and Game Plan, a lot of other movies there prior to moving out to LA, so I know the tax credit game as good as anybody as well. So That's me.
Jeff covers every base, absolutely. And then Lonry, if you want to tell us about your company.
Lonry, and I just want to be like Jeff. So
He has a picture of him with Obama on his iPad right now, so we'll see. Yeah.
religion and politics. Basically, Queen Nefertari Productions is a film finance and production company. So we do kind of bridge. We started out kind of as an equity investor and found out that that's probably we're going to be the last people to see a return, if any at all. So we kind of shifted our model to really focus again kind of on pre-sales, on gap, mezzanine, different types of lending that helps to assure that there's at least a break-even point. Otherwise, it has to be sustainable. We wouldn't be in business very long. So, we just kind of cover the gamut, and we're the kind of people that are going to come with creative solutions to regular financing.
So Lonry didn't mention that, and I assume this is not no secret, the head of his company, the chairman of the company, won a lot of money in the lottery. And she decided she wanted to start a production company, and they made several films. It's an amazing story. But that's when he mentions, she started out being an equity investor. She learned pretty quickly you can't just say, I'm going to bankroll this whole film with my money, because you will lose all your money or some chunk of your money doing that. So I think I should mention my background. I think I'm the moderator here because I am more like you. I've been doing this. I've been in the film business more than 20 years. I've done a lot of production work starting out many years ago. And then I worked for a company that was owned by the Independent Film Channel, and we gave money to films. We gave finishing funds. This was in the mid-90s to about 2002, to exceptional low-budget films from all over the world. People just sent us their tapes, and we looked at them, and Chris Nolan was one of those people. We financed, we gave finishing funds to his first film, and Joe Carnahan's first film, and a number of really talented filmmakers. So I was in that position of actually giving money, never had to think about having to raise money as a producer, but when the company closed, I became a producer, but rather than trying to learn this game that we're going to talk about of raising money, I had worked with filmmakers who've made films for $7,000. Chris's first film was $12,000, and I thought, well, I'm going to just make films with my own money and do that. And I've been doing that for several years. I've done 4 features, I guess, that way. And I also teach no-budget filmmaking through something I call No-Budget Film School. I've been doing that for 9 years. So when the discussion comes to all this doesn't make sense and how can I do it another way, I can talk to you guys about that, because that's certainly my expertise. But right now, with the filmmaker that I've been working with, we've done 4 features together. We're now in this game of trying to raise something like $1 million. This is a guy who's won, we've won many awards with our past films, and but they've all been done on really tiny budgets. And this is a really difficult game. I mean, and it shifts as you're playing it, and pieces come in and then they go out, and then that piece goes out, and you lose this piece over here, and it's like a jigsaw puzzle. So, so I think what you're probably most familiar with is this idea of equity. And we mentioned equity 2 or 3 times, but what you don't realize maybe is what equity really is. When someone says, if you go to your dentist, which is the kind of popular thing people talk about, my dentist wants to finance my movie, wants to give me money to make a movie. So I go to him and I say, I've got this movie, it's going to cost $200,000, and he's like, I'm a wrench dentist, and I've always wanted to do that. It sounds like fun, and they write you a $200,000 check, and you go make your movie. That's equity. That you've made your money with all equity, and you haven't done the tax credits and the pre-sales and all that kind of stuff. And often you will lose all or most of that money. I mean, it's just the way it is. So something that Lottery kind of mentioned that they kind of learned. So once you kind of get good at the game, you realize, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to have some equity in there because it's probably necessary. But there's other ways there's other kinds of money you can raise that will kind of ensure that you don't lose your shirt or whatever. So Lottery, why don't you mention? Can you take us through, kind of give us a quick primer of some of these major typical sources of financing, so we can understand. So when we talk about these terms, it's also kind of a definition of terms. When we talk about pre-sales or lending on tax credits, we have some sense of it, and then we'll kind of go through the specialists here that can talk about those things. We'll have the financiers on the panel talk about those things.
So financing, okay, so there are a bunch of different ways to get financing. number one, I always say it starts with the script. Make sure the script is amazing. So you can have equity investors. So again, rich uncle, cousin, investor, Kickstarter. People are a big fan of Kickstarter.
Kickstarter wouldn't be equity, it would be kind of a donation, I guess, it'd be a little different.
Right, indeed. You would, yeah.
You don't have to give it, you don't have to give it back, so
Right,
it's different.
exactly. Well, some people think equity, you don't have to give back either. But so equity, that's just kind of, yes, this person is investing in you, investing in the project. It would be kind of sort of like almost an angel round in financing if you use the tech startup model. And then, of course, then we start to talk about pre-sales, tax credits. Pre-sales are basically you have a company that's very interested in your project. You can have domestic or foreign. You have a company that's interested in your project for whatever reason. Maybe it's a very unique concept, or they like the stars, the actors you have attached. And they will say, hey, we're going to buy this when this film is completed. We're making a commitment to buy this film for X amount of dollars when it's completed. Some people don't understand that, that sometimes they think that they're giving you the cash up front and you get to go and make the movie or whatever portion of the movie you can with that money, but it actually is a commitment that once you deliver the film, that means everything, final credits, insurance, clearances, everything is done. Then, and once they, of course, accept it, then they will cut you a check. And so that's when you would definitely go to some of these esteemed people on the panel and say, here, I have a letter from this person who will buy this movie when it's done, and they will give you the cash equivalent based, and of course they'll take their fee and you'll negotiate about that. Tax credits, of course, are if you shoot in Louisiana, Michigan, California, maybe one day, by God, yeah, almost there. Hopefully, you'll get a rebate. So, for example, if you shoot a film in a particular state or country, even because you have international tax credits, they will give you back a portion of your spend, of your budget, whatever amount you spend in that specific country or state. They'll give you back a refund, basically. So again, it's not, hey, here's my budget. I plan to shoot this in Louisiana, so give me 30% of my budget. It is, here, if you go through and spend this amount, then we will pay you back upon completion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then again, you get somebody else on the panel and say, hey, I have this, give me cash. And, you work out the details. Then, of course, you have mezzanine gap. So once you get all what we call soft monies together, so that's again your tax credits, your pre-sales, etc., and then whatever equity you're able to find, and so your budget might be 10 million, it might be $1 million, it might be 500,000, whatever, and sometimes you're just shy of that by maybe 10-20%, and then so that's when you would come to another company like some of us up here and say, hey, I've got almost everything already done. We just need to, we used to call it just add water deals. We just need a little bit of cash to bridge the gap. That's what we call it, gap financing, because there's a little gap between the soft money and the hard money and what you finally need in your budget. So hopefully, did I cover everything? Was that
Sounds like good. Viviana, why don't you talk about, since you represent, the two of you together there represent kind of a similar type of financing, but coming in from slightly different perspectives, because you're not a bank, and he represented, he wasn't with a bank. And I don't know exactly the difference between, well, you can tell us the difference between getting it from a company like yours, which is a private company versus a company versus a bank. But talk first about the whole tax credit thing, like kind of how it usually works, and how a company like yours would be helpful if we were to shoot Louisiana or Georgia or something.
Tax credits, I think it's important to note there are two types of tax credits that you can get. There are rebates, like he was just saying, and there's transferable ones, which are credits. So depending on the state or the country, Louisiana, for instance, Massachusetts, Georgia, those are transferables. So once you go in, you make a film, depending on whatever the incentive is, if it's 30, sometimes they offer an extra bonus if you use locals. When you're done, you sort of submit a whole package to the state and said, I spent X amount of dollars, and they'll give you your 30, 35, 25% back. What they give you in those states is just a letter that's a credit. And that, in order to monetize it, you have to then find someone willing to buy that credit because it's transferable. It doesn't go right back to you, to your production. It's not money, it's not a check or anything like that. So one of the things that we offer is that when we lend on those states, we find a buyer for you. So we're sort of a one-stop shop where you don't have to necessarily worry about that. You just come to us and ask us whatever we're going to lend on, and then we also find a buyer that's then going to repay us the money. The other states that are straight rebate states, that's where you, once you complete your spend, let's say you're entitled to get 25-30% back, the state then just kind of goes through, they review everything, make sure everything's okay, they might knock out some things depending if it's qualified or not, and they'll just issue you a check, and that's a straight rebate.
And again, they're not giving this to you before you make your film. So if you make $1 million film and you expect to get $200,000 back from your rebate, you still have to have that $200,000 available to you to make the film. When do they give it back? And then I assume you guys will lend on the $200,000 that you're going to eventually get with the fee and some other things. So tell me a little bit about that.
So usually the way it comes to us is producers will come to us with a project and they'll say, okay, I have like $1 million, $2 million, whatever budget level it is, how much am I going to get back? And so we'll run an estimate, we'll go through the budget, we'll knock out what's qualifying, what's not qualifying, and we'll give them a number of what we think they're going to earn in eligible spend in whatever particular state they're going to shoot in. At that point, we say, okay, we can advance you 75%, 80%, whatever it might be. And that's sort of what we discounted, and that's what we lend up front. So that's money that you can then go out and go and shoot your movie with. That's, of course, with the other monies that you've raised, whether it's equity, pre-sales, however it is. However you sort of want to do your financial plan, let's say, for your budget. So once we lend that money, once the production goes out, makes the film, then we're repaid back once the state either gives us a credit, which we then obviously find a buyer and they pay us that money because they are now buying the credit, so they will pay us the money, or the state issues us a check. And that's sort of how we sort of lend our money there.
I think you can also tell, we didn't make it clear probably when we talked about equity. The thing about equity is it's there's this thing called a waterfall. And you imagine you're going to use all these different sources to raise your money, to raise money for your film, and then they're going to get paid back at certain times. Well, what she just described is somebody who's getting paid back pretty early in the process before the film's even been released.
Yeah, in the waterfall, since we are debt lenders, we are always last money in, first money out. So we're always ahead of equity, for instance, because
Equity
we
is
are
last.
Yes.
Again, that's the distinction between, or very little distinction perhaps, between the crowdfunding person who donates who's never going to get their money back, and the equity person who hopes and prays they're going to get their money back, and maybe they're the same because maybe neither one of them gets their money back. But the equity is very much the very bottom of that waterfall. The pond, the pond that's got all the dirt and stuff in it, the very bottom of the waterfall. No, I'm kidding. Why do you get? Sorry, go ahead.
One other, I think you asked sort of what is the
Difference
difference
between
between
the
bank. Yeah, okay. So we are private money, as you were saying, and so we are we can be a little bit more competitive in the sense that banks usually require a bond. And just to kind of explain what a bond is basically insurance that your film is going to get done and completed and delivered and finished. We don't necessarily require that. We'll do deals that are unbonded, and then we'll do deals that are bonded as well. Usually a bank requires a bond. So our sort of sweet spot of a lot of deals that we do tend to be deals that are unbonded, maybe up to even below $1 million, up to maybe 5 or 10, although we've gone up to 25. Although if it's 25, usually there's a bond involved. But we are able to lend on unbonded. And sort of one of the things that we do at that point is that we lend on actual qualified spend. So the production will go out, they'll make their film, they'll generate credits by using all of the other monies minus ours. And then we'll do sort of an audit of what they've spent up to a certain point, and we'll lend them against what they've actually earned in credit. So usually on the unbonded deals, our money comes in towards the end of principal photography, beginning of post-production.
And that's assuming they don't need that, they don't need your money yet because they haven't spent all of it yet, correct, right? So Kawhi, if you could talk about, from a bank's perspective, what might be different, someone coming to a bank to you're lending on some of the same things, but it's different, and if you could also talk about, I guess, pre-sales, that you guys lend on pre-sales, kind of how that works, if you know.
Yeah, sure. So actually, just before that, going back to the tax credits between transfer or rebates, I mean, you might be wondering why when you get a tax credit like you do in your personal tax return, you need to sell it. So you might know already when you make a single picture independent film, you set up an LLC in a certain state. Because that LLC has no tax liability, you can't actually claim that tax credit. That's why you have to transfer that to an entity which does have a tax liability in that state to claim that tax credit. So from a bank's perspective, so we're talking about the differences between the banks and the private lenders. So on the one hand, the private lenders are more competitive in the sense that they can be a bit more aggressive. They can lend on films without completion bonds, and they can lend against qualified spend. So on the bank side, we are more competitive in the sense that because we are more secured, we have completion bonds, we have first lien on all the assets. So we are more competitive in the sense that our pricing is usually lower, but we have more stringent criteria. I mean, for example, if you were to come to us with a film with a bunch of pre-sales, we would look at those contracts and we would usually discount those a little or by 50% depending on who it is. So with that, we can then look at the various other aspects like tax credits and gap financing. So I'd say we're less aggressive because we usually, in all cases, we do need pre-sales in place before we can lend against the other components like tax credits and gap, because we need some sort of actual collateral that's actually going to pay us, rather than, I guess, like Viviano, where they could just go on qualified spend. That's money coming, but it's not actual physical contracts. So because we're more secure with actual distribution contracts, we can then lend on those tax credits and gap at a more competitive pricing because we have physical collateral, we have senior lien on all the assets, and so we can lend against those. But we are more stringent. Viviana mentioned we do need a completion bond in place because if anything goes wrong, we need someone to ensure that the film will be made on time and on budget, so that it's actually delivered, which then activates the contracts that distributors actually pay us, because without that, we don't get paid. So that's very important for us. And also, a point I want to make about banks is that, especially for producers, directors who've not worked with bank financing before, you might relate this to your personal experiences with banks where you have a mortgage or something, so you might think, oh, if I go to a bank, finance a film, they might take my house if I don't pay the loan back. That's not the case, because the actual borrower would be the single purpose entity used to make the film. So we only have a lien on the assets of that entity for making the film. So we would take a mortgage of the copyright, all the incoming cash flows and everything for the film, but not for you personally. So that's an important point to know. So don't be scared of banks. They're here to help.
Be scared of the completion bond people.
Yeah.
That's what their job is, right? So he's talking about completion bond. It's essentially insurance for people who are giving this money up for you. So they're overseeing what you're doing, and and I've never worked with one, so if someone wants to describe exactly how they work, but they're essentially making sure it's happening, and if things aren't happening, they can fire the director, they can come in and kind of take over to make sure that this thing is going to get done at the budget level, and the film will be finished so that it can generate the revenue that's going to pay you guys back.
Just on that though, completion bond companies, they're definitely there to keep the producers in check, but I will also say they are also there to help you, because it's actually very rare that they actually take over the film and kick you aside, because it's just bad for everyone. So what they're there to do is basically make sure that everything's going on schedule, on time, on budget. If it's not, they'll give you advice and help you out. They're not there to kind of shoulder you off the show.
So Lonnery and I worked on we were at the beginning stages of a little movie called Dark Tide, which we got out of luckily. It was a Halle Berry movie. Halle met her husband on it, right? And it was this great shark movie. It was like a $12 million budget, shooting in South Africa. It had a 3-country tax credit deal with Halle Berry as a star. You know, Jaws meets, you know, Into the Blue or something like that, where she's swimming around the whole time. And what happened was, the deal was supposed to be $10 million in foreign sales, $2 million in equity, which we were bringing in. Stuart Ford, who's probably one of the most well-known foreign sales companies, he owns Ion Global, was putting up the money for foreign. The movie seemed like a no-brainer. $2 million risk would easily come back, right? Well, luckily for us, the producer on it changed the deal completely by the time we're in long form after spending money in short form to negotiate a contract. And by the time it came back, the equity went from $2 million to like $4 million that we needed to put up. And their fees jumped by $800,000. It's the best thing that ever happened to us because, and this is a long anecdotal story about the bond company, but the bond company, the film was bonded. By the time the proverbial shit hit the fan, the budget went way over, which we knew it would. The bond company had to come in and take it over because they approved a certain budget, which we knew they were never going to hit. They just did it because they assumed it was going to happen. It didn't. It went way over budget. The bond company came and took the movie over, and a bond company should never take a movie over because they're not creative people. They're people that are there to protect an investment that a bank needs to say, yes, if this all goes bad, we're going to make sure we do anything we can, put up as little money as possible to deliver this film so that we can deliver to get the contracts back. If you know anything about Dark Tide, which probably none of you do, there's a reason, because the bond company took it over. So go to Redbox, see if you can find it. Let us know what you think, and that's the example of what happens when a bond company takes over a movie. You never want that to happen. They don't want it to happen because they don't know what to do. They're not creative people. They're there to satisfy business. There's only 2 really big bond companies for a reason. It's not a profitable business unless you're doing volume and you're working with people who you know will finish the movie 90% of the time. So. And most of the time, people, $2 million and under, people don't bond movies because it's too expensive to do it, unless you have big cash that you're risking in your movie. So bond companies are good unless they're taking over your movie. Then that's bad.
So Jeff, tell us, you were telling me the other day about kind of, this is a little bit of a shift in gears, but I think we've kind of covered what are typical advisor sources of financing, but tell us your metaphor really for how a filmmaker kind of should approach this idea of, I'm going to go out and raise money for a movie. It's not going to be my money, and it's not going to be my friend's money with Kickstarter. But I'm going to get serious and I'm going to raise, a decent amount of money, $1 million or something. Tell us that.
Well, I always start by saying this because it's hard for people. I didn't go to school for this either. I just fell into it because I loved it, and I'm, not a finance guy. I became one just because I knew that was a trend in the business, and I needed to learn how to protect money that I was going to ask to raise, right? So you can't just say, you're not walking with your hand out and say, give me free money, and I'm not going to protect it. You're going to say, give me money, and I have to treat it as if it's my own because I want to come back for more money. And I want you to be so happy that you're going to give it to me. So I'm an Italian kid from Boston. If I ever walked into my grandmother's house or my aunt's house or one of my mom's friends' houses for a holiday, to go to the pool party in the summer, and I didn't step foot in there with a bottle of wine or a box of donuts or pizza, my mom would have smacked me upside the head, right? So you can't walk into somebody expecting something unless you're bringing them something first. So if you're going into a situation looking for money and you say, I'm going to give you, to your buddy before you go in, we're going to get this guy, you're in the wrong business. You'll stand out by saying, what can I do for this person to build a relationship or to show them I'm giving them something first before I ever ask for something in return, right? Now that's could be, if you play on the metaphor of it, it could be you're getting talent on a movie and you're giving them the first benefit of making a movie with real talent that will bring them money back. Or it could be your cousin owns a Ferrari dealership and this guy has been really wanting to get a hold of one for a while just to have fun with it. You're like, here's the keys for a month. That's my good faith. I'm giving it to you. You don't have to do anything in return, but I'm building a relationship with you and I'm showing I'm giving you something first before you ever give me anything. I had nightclubs in Boston as I was building my production company. People love to drink. People were out every night, from politicians. That's how I got the tax credits passed. Politicians, lawyers, every athlete of every professional sports team. So when you get the Red Sox who are winning the World Series, you get those tickets to give to the politician who is the Speaker of the House, who, when he's not supposed to take them, shows up and says, oh, this is great. It's about giving people something to build relationships, to show good faith. Everybody has something. You might not have it in the movie business, but everybody's cousins or uncle or something can do something to benefit you in the relationships you're trying to build. Always give something first before you ever ask for anything, and you'll be successful every time.
So I think it's probably fairly clear from hearing some of the, and just the kind of tip of the iceberg of some of the complexity of some of these things. We didn't even really talk, and we will in a bit, whoever wants to be the one to talk about pre-sales, go into a little bit more depth in pre-sales, like how's that work? Actually, we can just do it now. I was going to say, it's probably pretty clear that if you're going to go into those waters, you're going to want somebody, a producer who's worked in that way, understands it, or you're going to, if you're that producer, you're going to need to go and learn, how to do that. But so I guess we'll talk about that in a second. Equity is a little bit different if you're approaching an equity investor, whether that's going to be the only investment in the film or some part thing. There's a whole other approach. So there's two things that I'm kind of lining up here. One is for whoever wants to maybe down at the end of the table, you since you're an equity investor, you can talk about like what you're looking for when someone comes to you. But before that, who wants to be the one to tell us a little bit more, go into a little bit more depth about pre-sales? Like, how does it, I want to get pre-sales for my film. Who am I hiring to help me do that? How do those contracts work? It's technical, but maybe someone can offer that. Who wants to?
So basically, a pre-sale is a distribution contract done earlier than if you finished the film and sold it after it was done. So let's say I have a film starring Dustin Hoffman. It's a $5 million movie, and I take it to a distribution company before it's it's made, and I present who the producers are, what the cast is, what the budget is, how we're going to put it all together. That company will, if they like the project, they give you a contract that says upon delivery of the film, we'll pay you $1 million for U.S. rights. And so what that means is that once I've got the film, like I said before, once the film is finished, we deliver the film to the distributor, and once they check all the materials, then they pay us the $1 million. My company does that, but we also sell films after the fact. It's the same contract essentially. It's just that they're putting up they're putting the contract up earlier than they would normally if they saw it afterwards. These days you really do have to have cast to get a pre-sales contract, or you need a producer with some credits so the distribution company feels like you can go out and get the cast. So I don't think it's a good idea to be rolling around to international sales agencies or U.S. distributors with projects without one of those. I think it's a bit of a waste of time. They really need to see that there's the ability to get it put together, and that usually involves either cast or a producer who can get it.
And bankable directors in the mix.
Yeah, and other things as well. I guess anything that helps the package can. If the cast is not A-list, maybe it's A-minus, then a director can help. If you've got Tom Cruise in a $2 million movie, then probably any of us can direct it. But it's somewhere on that spectrum, whatever you can add to the package helps.
Talk about working with a foreign sales company. You mentioned going to a domestic distributor or getting a minimum guarantee, MG, and the process of going to a foreign sales company who would be looking at a lot of different distributors all over the world, and how that kind of works. So it's
sure. Yeah, it can work two different ways. International sales agencies can also actually offer minimum guarantees as well, which are kind of like almost like a distribution contract, where once you deliver the film, they actually are on the hook for paying you the money. But you can also strike a relationship where the international sales agency goes to the various markets around the world, or picks up the phone and calls their distributors around the world, and then makes essentially the same kind of deal that you can make with a U.S. distributor, where once they deliver the film to that distributor in Germany or whatever, then that's when they would pay that minimum guarantee. It's really the same thing. I think most international sales agents that are capable of doing that, it's the same equation. You really need, cast or
an executive producer that can get cast or an A-list director in order for them to really bite into something like that.
Is there a particular genre right now, any of you can answer this question, that seems to be hot or is like overdone, that no one wants to finance anymore or whatever? Obviously cast, you'll hear this all the time. Cast. If you don't have cast, you're going to hear, we're sorry, but we don't have cast, which is what I keep hearing. But is there some like kind of up to the minute, like this is where the market is today, or is it not really, does it not really work like that? The market could change tomorrow, horror films are in or they're out or whatever.
Well, I can touch on that for a second just to say everything's it's trendy, right? Everything's based in trends, and sometimes people that are behind the trends, when you're seeing it in the papers and it's oversaturated, and you think it's a great idea, somebody was already ahead of it 2 years before. So you can't look at it from the sense of, oh, I see a lot of action movies out there right now, I'm gonna make an action movie, right? You have to be ahead of the trends. I read, I know I'm raised the same way. I read the news of every possible news site I can read every single day. From Al Jazeera to Fox News to CNN to in different countries to see what entertainment trends are, what political trends are. And I think it sort of just computes in your head. You start to realize where you start to see things, a roadmap of what's going on in the world. That's number one. When the economy was at its lowest, drama didn't work, right? People didn't want to go and escape to something when their lives were just as depressing when they left. They wanted to go see movies like the James Cameron movie, the big one. Avatar, right? They want to escape when they went. If they're going to spend the money that they barely have, they want to go and escape to a different world.
And they were feeling blue.
Right, exactly. Well, it was a metaphor for their life too, right? But there was a movie called The Company Men. Loaded with talent, it didn't matter because it came out in the exact worst time in the economy, and it's about people losing their jobs. But Ben Affleck's in it, and all these other guys, Kevin Costner. A lot of big names are in it, but it didn't matter because no one wants to go and see stuff they're living every day. But in the 90s, when life was good, everybody loved going to see dramas and crying because they were happy at home. They had 5 jobs. They had houses they couldn't afford, but they had 5 jobs to pay for it, but life was good. So you have to think of it in the sense of people drive entertainment, right? Social media has changed a lot of that because things are a lot quicker, so it's hard to follow the trends. Because a trend can change overnight with social media, and we're in a world economy now. So something that happens in LA, people in Malaysia or Qatar or Russia know about it at the exact same time. So you don't have that sort of slow launch that we used to have to be able to follow the trends easier. So I think make movies that you're passionate about. Because if you're passionate about it, odds are somebody else is, and if nobody else is, make another movie. Or make your movie with your own money and then learn the hard way what that means. But the key is, obviously, good material, be passionate about what you're selling, and you'll always be able to sell it to someone. And it's like anything else. I'm sure 90% of the people in this room are saying, how do I find money? Because that's how we all started. Where can we find money? Everybody's selling everybody. The studio's selling someone. It doesn't matter how much power or money they have, they're selling someone to buy it. The person that's making the movie is selling someone to take it from them. The producer is selling an actor being in the movie so he can sell it to somebody else, right? So in that context, think about what can I benefit the person that I'm going to ask for money and what can I sell to them? Some equity investors just want to party and be around celebrities. Some equity investors want to really make money. And if you're dealing with that investor, you need to find a way to make them money. You might find the investor that's a billionaire that doesn't care about making money. They just want to be in Hollywood. You better get to the biggest contacts you can so that when they're in Hollywood, somebody else who's bigger doesn't snatch them away from you, number one. And number two, you're experience. It never happened to me, I promise you that. I'm not really going to attest to that.
But you did find that investor, at least.
No, I know. We work in this town, we know everybody, so we know all the stories that happen. And this is another thing, I want to play on that. Everybody knows everybody in this town. So don't ever try to work one angle over somebody else, because we all talk, as you can see, we all know each other for years at some point or another. We've done a panel, we've met at some film festival. Everybody that's real knows everybody else. So be honest. Do not lie to people, it'll come back to you and you'll end your career a lot quicker than you started. I'm glad you brought that up.
Let's do that second question. Laundry, maybe you can answer this, because you kind of teed it up a little bit with this idea that you're going to be, selling. And again, I think for almost anybody in this room, you'll be in that position where, even if you're a director, if you're not the producer, but you're going to be going to somebody who has money. And it's not the complicated part of that process, but the guy, like the dentist person, or a company that offers equity, what are you looking for, I guess, as far as like enthusiasm and material and that kind of thing, and also what more tangible things are you looking for? What do we need to come to you with if you're your company or if you're like the dentist? It might be slightly different, but there's going to be certain materials that you're almost always going to need, and then these kind of intangible things that you're you're also looking for. If you could talk about those kinds of things.
Sure.
As an equity investor.
Okay, so the basic things that we're looking for are if you have somebody, the biggest thing is don't say this actor's interested in it because that means zero, or don't say Lionsgate is interested in distributing this. Well, if they're really interested, you're going to have an LOI. If they're really, really interested, they're going to have a commitment letter. So a lot of people.
The letter of intent is the LOI, correct?
Yes, LOI is a letter of intent. And then sometimes you actually have an actual commitment, an actual contract that says, yes, I will star in this movie, or yes, we will distribute this film.
Is that contract with an actor always a pay-or-play type of a contract, where you are paying someone, they're going to be in your movie whether you make the movie or not, and they get the money whether they make the movie? That's pay-or-play, right?
Yeah, that's pay-or-play.
That's not necessarily what you're talking about.
No. That's just an LOI is simply a letter saying specifically from the actor or the agent saying that they are truly interested in playing this movie or playing this role in this movie. Of course, there'll be some language about contingent on scheduling and budgeting, et cetera, that they are officially interested. What happens a lot of times, filmmakers try to say, because they know somebody who knows somebody, they'll say, oh, they're interested in them, or they bumped into somebody at Starbucks and said, oh, they're interested in the idea of the script, and they try to use that to reel in investors or try to pitch or sell the project. And I'm not going to say it's a lie, but it's kind of misleading, because if you have someone who is that dentist or that person who believes in you or is willing to take that risk, kind of goes back to what Jeff was saying. You really want to make full and positive and lasting relationships. So a lot of people are so focused on this one particular project. They gotta get it done. They gotta get it done. They gotta get it done. They, logic and sometimes they bend corners and bend the truth a little bit to get that project done, instead of really realizing that most movies take over 5 years to get made. A lot of the movies that are in theaters now, you have no idea what the writers, directors, actors, everybody went through, even the distribution companies, what they went through to get it there. So be, like Jeff said, write stories that you like and that you want, and realize that, hey, if nobody likes that movie, or you're having a difficulty with that particular movie, put it to the side, and work on something else. Or stay on it, and just make sure that you're staying on the up and up, and you're being honest and forthright with what you're doing, because it is a very, very, very small world. And I've had phone calls where people will call me and say, hey, are you partnering with such and such? Because they just told me that you partnered with them on this movie. Really?
I met him at a gas station.
Right, exactly. And or they're a member of your company, or they're repping your film fund or something. So it really does. It really is a very, very small world. So tangibles, when you say you have an actor or a director, you want to have them actually attached, because we will, of course, go back and check, and we'll ask for those letters, and we'll ask around for a person's reputation. Have you ever worked with this person? So there'll be a lot of spot checking. If you have pre-sales, we're going to want to see not just, if you have pre-sales, you have pre-sales. If you have estimates, you have estimates. There are 3 columns, if any of you guys have seen waterfalls or are familiar with regular budgets. There's, the low, high, and the take. So basically, low estimate of what a territory would give or a distributor would give for a particular film. And there's a low, a high, and then what we would all say, okay, we'll take it if we can get it. So as financiers, we always look at the low, and then we even like she said, discount the low from the low, because we've seen all these deals before, and we see what happens a lot of the time at the last minute. Somebody will pull out, or somebody will change their mind. So tax credits, make sure all your paperwork is in order. We'll want to see all of that. We'll check everything out, and sometimes we have to have all of the contracts in order. We have to have a lawyer review because these are transactions. Like you were saying, we have to make sure that everything is on the up and up. We have to make sure that there's a way to protect the business. And so sometimes, don't get upset if a financier or a person blows you off because, I shouldn't say that they blow you off, but if they don't jump on your film project, because sometimes, legal fees alone are $50,000 just for us to look and verify everything. So if it's a $150,000 movie, a lot of times it's just not worth the risk, because there'll be times where somebody will submit a script and then it's similar to another idea, and so somebody wants to sue, and it's like sometimes it's just not even worth the hassle. So with all that said, please, I'm a huge believer. Like, I started as an actor in this city 12 years ago, and I've heard no more times than like you can imagine. So as filmmakers, I would suggest you still go after your passion and really, really push and believe in your product, and then find out what are all the ways that I can promote and gain awareness and exposure for my project. Do you know some celebrities? Do you go to the gym? Is there a director that you know? Can you get online? Can you do a Kickstarter? Can you put a trailer together? Can you put some scenes online? Can you create a blog? Those are the things that inspire and interest me. These are the intangibles that I want to see, because I want to believe in somebody's project as much as they believe in it. And if they just...
Would you get involved with the first-time feature director? I mean, if they had some of those things, or would you really like to see a feature under their belt, whether it was a $10,000 feature or whatever?
I mean, a feature is always safer, but if there's somebody that's going out there, and we've seen it before, there are a lot of first-timers that have won Oscars. So if somebody comes and they're just so incredibly passionate and they've done as much as they can possibly do, I mean, especially with the internet now, we have, and social media, there's so many ways to gain and build an audience, because when it really comes down to it, it truly is show business. So if there are certain people of the show business that are creative, and they're responsible for getting the stories that we all want to see and talk about and laugh about with our friends. And then there are people that are going to be the financial backbone of those. I like to kind of be like right in the middle. And so if you've done all the show you possibly can, and you've gotten everything in you that you possibly can just imagine to get out there. Like, I go to Sundance every year. Like, Christo and I, we go way, way, way back. And you would imagine some of the things that we've done. Like, we've shot movies on nothing, before there were even iPhones. And so that's the kind of thing, me personally, like, I want to see that passion, and I want to be looking at somebody like, okay, this is going to happen with or without me. How can I help this person get there? Because this person is driven. This person is doing everything they can. They're taking advantage of all the resources that are available to them, and they're going to make it happen. If they're going to do it now, I can trust that they're going to do it on the set and all the way through the end, through distribution, through the film festival route, through press junkets, because it is a long process, and sometimes people peter out way early. And if it's just, hey, here's my project, I might have some interest from this person, that person. Well, you're not excited about it, neither am I. Because there are 30 other people who are beating down the door and have all their stuff lined up, have 100,000 Twitter followers that are tweeting their stuff, Instagram videos up, and they're really taking advantage of everything that they have access to.
Glenn, can you've worked as a producer on projects that were set up with different forms of financing, and maybe a piece fell out, or as you were kind of working on it. Can you give us do you have an example of a film that you can kind of take us through that kind of demonstrates the kind of some of the pitfalls in the process, this process of having to try to raise money for HollyShorts?
In a budget level that might be relevant to the room.
Yeah, I mean, I produced a film called Night Train a few years ago, which was a thriller. And, at the time, I had not dealt with agents myself. I had dealt with them as a lawyer, but not as a producer. And so I took the film to a producer named Arnold Rifkin, who ran William Morris and then started his own production company, partnered with Bruce Willis for a number of years. And because of, he has some juice. And with him attached, he liked the project. With him attached, we went to an international sales agency, and at that moment, we were talking to cast, but didn't have anybody attached, per se, meaning we didn't have a contract. But with Arnold on board, we could say from the producer of Die Hard, whatever it was, Harder with a Vengeance or one of those. And the international sales agent, who wasn't necessarily one of the more established ones, but kind of an up-and-coming one, was willing to work with us because he didn't have anything with that kind of name value attached to it. But he had the relationships from working with other bigger international sales agencies, so we kind of were catching him at the right point in his trajectory in order for him to be able to go out without actually the cast attached. So he went to the Cannes Film Market with the project, and we were trying at the time, I think we were trying to make it for $1.5 million. And he was able to go get contracts for about half the budget from, I think it was 5 or 6 territories in Europe. And so with that, we then approached a finance company, one of these guys, that then came and said, okay, we decided to shoot East, as opposed to you going to a state with a tax credit, we shot in Eastern Europe because you can make things extremely cheaply there. So we went to a financier who then agreed to make a loan against the pre-sales and then essentially provide equity for the balance, pending getting cast. So then with Arnold on board, we went out and got Danny Glover and Steve Zahn and Lily Sobieski, and at the time that was, I don't know if it works today, but that worked at the time. And that was the way we were able to finance the film.
And those pieces all stayed together and everything worked?
Yeah, I mean, the hard part always with cast is, what we were lucky with there was we had a sales agency believing in Arnold and distributors believing in our sales agency without the cast actually attached. The hard part of that is without Arnold, at the time, that international sales agency would have said to me, you've got to have the cast attached. And the hard part of that is, let's say I had a relationship with Kenny Glover and I got him to agree to do it. The hard part of that is when the international sales agent is going to go to the market, make the sales, and I've got to keep Danny on board, for this months on end before we can get those pre-sales and then get the money and get everything secured so we actually know what the release date is. And it's hard to get actors, or especially agents, to let their actors commit to kind of open-ended production dates. So we were kind of lucky in that regard with regard to cast.
Can someone talk about estimates, because pre-sales is a contract that you can lend off of, but estimates are valuable too if they mean anything. But if you're going to equity investors and you can prove that that a good foreign sales company has provided you estimates, that I assume can be helpful in getting the equity money, because there's some proof that we actually can sell this. And of course, the pre-sales and estimates, then well, actually, someone puts their money down. But can we talk about, someone will talk about estimates?
Yeah, I'll say for the most part, I don't know how these guys feel, but we're pretty much on the same wavelength from the foreign sales industry. There's certain people we work with, there's certain people we don't. And just to touch on what he was saying, there are some up-and-coming foreign sales companies that they've worked with bigger companies, they start their own, and they're right at the right trajectory in their career where they're not one of the big dogs. You maybe can't paper their estimates or paper their offer, which means you can't go to a bank and get money for it, but they're probably going to hit the marks they're saying they are, and you're only as good as what you're able to do, right? So I generally, and I know Ron feels the same way. We only work with foreign sales companies that are good enough that their paper means something, that we can walk into a bank and say, Stuart Ford or Nick Chartier said they're going to do this amount of money, and it's good enough that they're going to believe it. Or if I'm going to an equity investor, say it's not my money, and I have estimates on a movie that I'm passionate about putting together, and Nick Chartier Voltage says, I'm going to give you the middle round estimates of $10 million for this movie. Anybody in town, if that comes back to them, because everyone talks, they're going to say, if Chartier says he's going to do it, he's probably going to do it. So they're going to, every time you go to an equity investor, they're calling 5 people to say, should I do this? That makes them feel more comfortable knowing that you're probably going to protect your money in foreign sales alone. And they're going to say, but who's this guy? Oh, Nick Chartier, he only won 2 Oscars, or he's only done X, Y, and Z. So when you're working with people that have a name that always do what they say and their estimates are of value, then that means something to an equity investor. If it's the 4 millionth foreign sales company on IMDb, doesn't really matter. I mean, we could all start a foreign sales company right now and call it the Academy Sales. Yeah, it probably actually was, but it wouldn't mean anything. So you want to work with people who have a name, who bring value, and those estimates matter. Just having a piece of paper that has estimates from someone who doesn't deliver or who doesn't have a track record to deliver is meaningless. So, yeah.
I think just a little thing, when you're working with sales agents, look at what types of films they're selling, because some sales agents specialize in faith-based, some specialize in horror, some in action, some in comedy, some in little indie, quirky darlings. Like, find a sales agent that fits your film, because they're going to know what talent you need to get for it to hit as much of the highs as you can. They're also going to know who are the best distributors for it, the best festivals for it, the best markets to sell it. I would say do a little bit of homework on IMDb or on their website to see what films they're selling that fits your film the best.
The beginning is, anybody can be a filmmaker, but like Monray said, how do you stand out as a filmmaker? All of us have to stand out in some way to be successful in what we do, or else you're not going to be successful. I don't know whether you're running for politics, you're running for anything, or you're trying to take a job, you need to stand out. So there are directors now that have been directing for 20 years that still have to do sizzle reels or shoot a tonal trailer to show the studio that what their look is, because their name enough doesn't matter. So just what you guys are doing with short films, there are people that have been established for years that still have to do the same thing. So one is you have to stand out with your talent, whether you're a writer, you're a director, you're a producer. How do you stand out?
And your material.
Yeah, your material has to be there. Look at yourself as a brand. You're a brand. Twitter allows that. Instagram allows that. YouTube allows that. Make sure your brand voice is unified. It's all saying the same thing. It's not scattered, and you'll stand out better that way. That's number one. Number two, the biggest thing, the easiest way to be successful and make money and appeal to an equity investor or foreign sales company, obviously, is you look at it like it's a house, right? I don't know, I like to go camping every now and again, but I don't want to live in a tent, right? I want to build the best house I possibly can, because I know when it's time to sell that house, somebody else is going to want it probably for more money than I put into it. So look at your movie like it's a house, right? I may not want the trailer that you have on the piece of property you have, but somebody might. A smaller company might want that trailer, because they're going to build a house on that land, and they're going to wipe your trailer off. So you look at it from that standpoint, and you say, how can I make this project the most appealing to the people I want to be in business with? The first way to do that is to make things for a budget. I mean, we talked about this briefly, I think. But when people come to me and they say, yeah, I got this great movie, it's just $25 million. Then I say, well, I know you don't know about the business, because great movies aren't getting made at $25 million. Those great movies that used to get made at $25 million are getting made at 2.5 now or less, because the actors will do it, because they want to be out there. So that's why you're seeing big names make movies that are lower budgets now. And the story always rings through. Those $2.5 million movies have a chance of getting recognition at film festivals. And that's how those filmmakers are building names for themselves. They make them for a price. If you're making a movie that's over $1 million, then you better have huge stars attached to it, because they're not making money. And you know this more than anybody, because they're making movies for no budget. So the budget's important, right? If you go and you spend $5 million of some investor's money I don't want to insult anybody, but a Z-level star attached to it, some reality star, or not even, like somebody who's never acted before, you can't expect that real people are going to want to be in business with you unless somebody in that process got the best possible performance and the best possible look for that movie that is imaginable. Paranormal Activity is a great example. It was shot for nothing. It took years and years and years for Brian Kavanaugh Jones and CAA, a major agency, to get somebody to take that movie on. Because it was low budget, it was a nothing movie. It ended up being one of the most profitable movies they've ever put out. Was it Paramount? I think Paramount put it out. So yes, low budget movies can stand out. You not having a name can stand out. You have to make yourself as appealing as possible to work with the people that you want to be in business with, right? So just going to a film festival is not enough. Say you have your brand locked down, because you've been in the business a long time, right? You have a lot of relationships, your online profile's there, you check out, no one will ever say a bad thing about you, right? Along that line, you must have built relationships with people that have grown just like you have in the business. So I always say building your team around you is the second most important thing, because you're only as good as the people around you. So if I'm a producer, I'm not a director, I'm not a writer. I have relationships with people in the years that I've had in the business that I can call someone if I need them. I can't do everything myself, right? So I stand up by saying, I'm doing good at what I do. I establish myself. Who can I work with that'll help me get this to the next level? How can I stand out to Stuart Ford and Global? We all go to the same festivals. I see the same people every day. Even if Stuart hated my guts, he's still going to see me at every single festival, and he's going to know I'm still in business 7 years later, right? So you build. I think the hardest thing to build in this business, these guys might verify or disagree, is longevity. We see people come and go in 2 years, they're a flash in the pan, they're out, and I don't see them again at the festival. And I judge based on what I see in Cannes, Toronto, Berlin. Because if they're there spending money, they're probably still in business. So that's the other thing. And I know you guys are, I'm sure a lot of people here are saying, I want to get my movie made, how do I get to the next level? Everybody is different. You look at Matt, Damon and Ben Affleck. These guys were actors. And I think about it being from Boston, the Robin Williams stuff that happened over the past week. Those guys struggled to get that movie made for like 10 years. I mean, they were actors in the business. They had made School Ties, a bunch of other movies. They were around the right people, but they got that made at a time when independent movies didn't exist, and they only got it made because one person said yes, which was Harvey Weinstein, which at the time was a visionary. He was a visionary. He had made concert videos. The studio system hated him. They didn't want him to take their thunder. They didn't want him even in the business. He made that movie. If you poll every studio executive in town right now, and there was a study that I think happened like 6 years ago, I think 90% of the studio executives at the time, the studio head said that Good Will Hunting was one of the top 5 movies of all time on their list. And that movie was made when nobody wanted to make it, from kids that were just actors who no one cared about at the time, to a guy that should have never been making movies. He was a concert promoter. So there's there's no right way to do it, but there's no limits. The only limits you guys put on you are from yourselves. So you just have to find the angle. It's like if there's traffic on Sunset, and you got to get home to Hollywood and Highland, how are you going to do it? You got to find the quickest way, or it's your problem if you want to sit in traffic. You know what I'm saying? I take Fountain. I know the quickest way. I've done it a bunch of times. Look at it that way, and that's the best answer I can give you as far as how you stand out.
Okay, another question? Yeah.
One of the tax credit states that you haven't mentioned is New Mexico. I was just wondering if you had any experience and what those experiences were, because I've heard a mix.
So the question was about the New Mexico tax credit.
Yeah, we actually financed a film earlier this year in New Mexico. It was our first one, and we've had a great experience so far in New Mexico. They're very competitive. The film office is great. There's Toby Ives, Nick Maniatis is the head of he's the film commissioner. We've submitted it about 2 months ago. It's already at the Tax and Rev department. It's gone through the film office. It's already being reviewed, and we're hoping to get our money back in a couple of months, actually, which is way ahead of schedule. The credit is about $2 million or so. The incentive. I'm sorry. It's I believe 25%, and then they offer more for locals as well. But they have a very big program, and they have mainly made their fame through TV because Breaking Bad is shot there, and a couple of other shows are going, but they're getting some bigger films as well. So I have nothing but great things to say about that state.
Great, thanks. Yeah, first.
I have 2 questions. The first one is really quickly. I just want to know on what forum you guys typically interact with the people that are looking for money. Like, is it festivals? Is it coffee talk? Is it a bar? Like
The people meaning the directors and producers
Yes,
essentially?
when
So
you
where
guys-
would you find the directors and producers who are looking, who have projects, who are looking for money?
yeah, who approaches you? On what environment do you guys interact with the people that you do business with that are looking for your assistance?
Okay, I'll start. A lot of our business is a repeat business, so it's producers we've done deals with in the past. We've already had one experience with them. They understand our process. We trust them enough. They've delivered a film. They'll come to us with the next one. A lot of referrals we get come from lawyers that we deal with, maybe who are lawyers representing producers. They say, oh, I have this client of mine, he has this film, I'm looking for this amount of money. We also get a lot of cold calls as well, or cold emails that come in. Those are a little bit, some are legitimate, some are not. It just depends. I pride myself on following up on every single one of them. I believe you return every phone call, return every email. Even if it's just to educate them on what we do, I'm always doing that because, again, it's this town, you just never really know. One person might be looking to make money 1 year and make a film, and then 10 years later, they're all of a sudden, they've won awards, they're making stuff. They'll always remember that I responded to that email, so I respond always. I would say also sales agents are a great source of deals for us as well. Sales agents always are sort of a great resource because they sort of know, okay, there's these pre-sales, or I'm selling this film, I've got this talent attached, let's, maybe you can help out with the credit or maybe lend on the pre-sales. So those are the kind of the main sources where we get our referrals from. I don't know if somebody else wants to guess.
So yeah, no, pretty much the same with us because pre-sales are so important for us that a lot of times we get referral from sales agents. And then we also talk to our attorneys a lot, and we also get cold calls. But for the cold calls to really work, you really need to have some pre-sales in place from the sales agents, because that's when we can actually start doing business together. At the same time, because we're in business to do business, we're always happy to help producers who are in the more nascent stages of development. If, say, they need equity or talent, we always try to help, because if we help them in that stage, they'll eventually come back to us for the actual business that we want to do. So, yeah.
For me, it's kind of, it can kind of be all over the place. And I travel a lot, so I know I have a lot of friends that have left me emails and voicemails and all that, and I haven't gotten back. And I apologize, Krista. But one of the things is I used to all the time take every single meeting. Anybody that was interested, anybody that wanted to talk, coffee, tea, whatever. But it ended up that my day would get full of meetings that oftentimes wouldn't go anywhere, and then I wasn't able to handle the actual business of the company. So one of the things that we did and start to really, really put in place and utilize is our agent. Represented by Jay Cohen over at Gersh, and he does a lot of the filtering for us. Sometimes he's a little, harsher than we would like, but in the end of the day, it really has to be something that's really worth both of our time. So it's kind of one of those things where I don't want to waste time hearing about a project that's not going to go anywhere, but I also don't want to waste your time or give false hope if the relationship isn't going to work, or if the project isn't going to meet our specifications. So I love really an email intro with a very complete package of and a big description of what you're doing, what you have, what you've done so far, who you've talked to, who you're planning to talk to next. Give me as much detail as possible, even in that email, and then when we do meet, and if we do meet, we can kind of get right to it. Everybody knows the Hollywood thing. Oh, I'll call you next week. Oh, let's do lunch. Oh, I love it. Right? Okay, we know that 90% of that is BS, right? So let's get it out of the way ahead of time, and then make meaningful contact and meaningful discussions, and then that way, we're both using each other's time the most efficiently as possible. Like, people can like you, but they're not going to make a movie with you just because they like you. Sorry. It rarely happens.
You had a question?
Yeah, and then the other one is I would invite you guys to speculate on the profitability of film as a medium, given the kind of digital revolution. Piracy is rampant. Theater ticket sales are more expensive than they ever have been. What is your guys' confidence level in investing in film, given the current environment of it as an artistic form? Do you guys feel confident in the solidarity of film as a profitable endeavor moving forward?
In a kind of macro sense.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, so it's a little, that's maybe beyond the scope of this panel. I can tell you two things. If you're Disney and you're in the business of making franchise branded product, times are good. You know, you make $1.2 billion on Frozen or $1.5 billion on the Avengers, and you're just lining up. But they're getting out of essentially the business of making anything smaller than whatever $150 million films. If you're in the business of making $200,000 films or $100,000 films, that's a horrible business. And I can tell you from my experience and from the experience of all my friends, it's not from a business standpoint. Most likely, you're going to lose that money. It doesn't mean it's not a good idea to do it. And when I teach my class, the first thing I tell people, if you're taking my class, you're taking a no-budget class, which the whole point of my class is not to do any of this. You're not going to raise money at all. It's going to come out of your pocket. You might do some crowdfunding. You might go to a family member, but you're not going to put together a business plan. You're not going to try to email these people and try to get foreign sales and all that stuff. That's not. It's all about making a film with whatever resources you have available to you, and there's a whole process, and it's a whole other world. It's like an alternate universe. But that's the first thing I tell people who take that class is you will not make your money back, because 99.9% of the time you won't. You may not make any money. Like, you may zero money, not your money back, but zero money. Like $2 may not come back to you. That's how difficult the business is. But there's plenty of other reasons to make a film. And the best advice is to not, you mentioned it before, don't spend a lot of money on it, because you will likely not get it back. And there's a whole process, and that's a whole 2-day class that I teach. But I don't know if the idea of, like, overall, if I'm sure it's a good business, and if but most people lose their money in it. So if you're working at a small level, if you do the checks and balances, and you've gone through pre-sales and all those kinds of things, you can ensure that there's a better chance you're going to get your money back. But if you're kind of working at this kind of smaller level, $100,000, and you're not getting pre-sales, there's no estimates, there's no real insurance, it's likely you will lose that money. It doesn't happen every time, and that's why people still invest. And I can tell you the winners, but you won't hear about the losers. And most losers don't like to, even when it looks like they're winning, they've lost, they don't tell you that. But that's just my opinion.
Well, yeah, just to temper what he said,
So it's not so depressing.
Yeah, I don't want it to be depressing, because it's not. What he just said, everyone said to us before we sat up here, before we ever took a job, before we ever got into entertainment. So, Lon Ray's wife won Mega Millions for $112 million. The odds are 175 million to 1. So, if she could do it, pretty much anybody can do anything if they step up, buy the ticket, and get there. So you have to just not take no for an answer. That's the first test in that subject. Second is, you can buy a $100,000 watch, but if you're buying a Timex and it's not a Rolex, then you probably made a bad investment, right? Same goes for movies.
Yeah.
If you're stepping up and you're sticking $100,000 into a movie with your cousin that you grew up with down the street, and the guy who's directing it, somebody you went to elementary school with, who has no need, never touched a camera, then I hate to say it, unless you're really rich, there might be something off with you, and I'm going to help you get therapy somewhere. That's number one. Number two is, sometimes if you're passionate, it's worth sinking money into your passion, but there are so many ways to do it now for a lower budget that you're not sinking if you're sinking $100,000, $200,000 to make a movie with nobody in it, there's something wrong. It shouldn't cost you more than $5,000. Because for that money, you can protect your money. And that's what I was saying about making movies for a price. If you make $1 million movie with James Franco or Chris Evans, you're gonna make your money back. I don't care how terrible it is, maybe you break even, right? But if you're making a $100,000 movie or $1 million movie with nobody in it, and the director's not the next Steven Spielberg, that's obvious. It seems like it's difficult, it's not. It's very straightforward, right? If you believe that you're the most talented person in the world and you're putting your money where your mouth is, and you've gotten recognition for your work, Some people take the gamble. Some people buy a lottery ticket, right? And your family might believe in you too, or your friends might believe in you. But everything you do should be tempered by, how do I protect this? If I'm gonna put 200 grand into it, it's not, the movie business has never been a lottery. It's never been, let's just make a movie and we're gonna be rich. The industry in the 80s and 90s wanted you to believe that because Hollywood is this glamorous thing. But every time they took a chance on a movie, they knew they were gonna probably make their money back for a reason, right? So when you make your movie, if it's about making money, find ways to protect your investment. Just like buying a house. I'm not gonna buy $1 million house in a bad neighborhood where I can't grow. I'm gonna buy a $100,000 house in a good neighborhood, even if it's the smallest house in the block, because I know that I have room to grow from that. I know what it's worth in the worst case scenario. And think from the movie standpoint, it's the same thing.
I'll temper what he just said with the idea that, you know, I start off my class with this information that you're not going to make your money back, and then I ask everybody who now doesn't want to make their movie, because I just told you you're not going to make your money, and everybody still wants to make their movie because you guys are passionate, you want to make your films, and you know, and I'm all about, that's why I teach this class for 9 years, because I want you to make your movies. I don't want you to spend $100,000 of your own money to do it, because you don't know if you're the next Chris Nolan. And we had a lot of people come through our office when I was at Next Wave that have huge studio careers now, who started off making films for no money. It's a great way to launch a career. It's a great way to have access to some of these people. If you make a $20,000 or $50,000 film and it does pretty well at festivals and it doesn't make your money back, that doesn't mean it wasn't a good idea. It doesn't mean it doesn't get you to some next level. And that's what my class is all about. It's all about launching a career, you don't want to stay in that world. It's a world that I've stayed in. It's hard to make, that's why I teach, it's hard to make a living making these kinds of films because it's become even harder because you're getting, you know, pennies instead of dollars now as far as these kind of digital platforms and that kind of thing goes. So anyway, so I think there's no question that it's easier to make a low budget film. It's hard to make a good film at any level, but if you're really good, you know, you should go for it. You know, just don't mortgage your house. Yeah, don't put it on credit cards and do these kinds of things. Every once in a while that works and you hear that story, you're like, he did it on credit cards, but they don't do it. And I was taking calls from people when I was at Next Wave who were like, have you looked at my film yet? Because they're turning off the lights. And it's like, they're probably going to turn off your lights because, you know, we haven't looked at your film, but it's likely when we do look at your film, we're not going to give you finishing funds and you're not going to get your lights turned on, so you don't do that. Don't mortgage your house and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear from some of you in your career. What is the project you're the most proud of, and what did you take from that collaboration you had with a producer or a filmmaker?
So the question is, what is the project that you're most proud of that you got involved with, and then what did you take from the experience of getting involved with that project?
For me, it's a film called Conversations with Other Women with Helena Bonham Carter and Erica Carter in 2006. That was one where I found an equity investor to make it for $500,000. But we had the cast who dug the project, who liked the director, and it just came out great. It didn't like go to Miramax or anything like that. But it did great foreign. Did about $2 million in sales foreign, and on the domestic side, we actually released it ourselves theatrically and put it through another company for the various ancillary rights, and made a little money there as well. But just content-wise, it's my favorite movie that I made, just from a viewer perspective.
You can come back to me.
Yeah, it's funny. I've worked on a lot of big movies. I've worked on some small movies myself. Actually, it's the funniest thing is I worked on The Departed. I was a consultant for a studio in Boston with the tax credits. For me, that was probably my most proud moment because it really launched my thinking where I wanted to be and how I ended up here in my career. I love Boston. That movie is probably, you know, with the actors that were in it, the cast that we had, and the experience, was probably the one I'm the most proud to ever have my hands in. As far as physically being a producer, the movie I'm probably most proud of working on is actually one that we're about to set up with a studio right now. It's called Gaddafi's Point Guard. You guys will be seeing it in the press pretty soon. It's based on a best-selling book that I helped shepherd from the story. The kid is a basketball player who grew up in Boston. He's Nigerian-born. Didn't make it to the NBA. It was the last draft. Should have played for the Celtics. Ends up going to play in Europe. Through a string of bad luck, gets drafted by the team in Libya, Benghazi, Libya, that's owned by the Gaddafi family. Turns the program around, they start winning 3 weeks prior to the civil war breaking out right in front of his window. So he has to escape. Think Argo meets Hotel Rwanda. So I literally started from the story, directly from the guy, all the way to the book, getting published, getting it as a best-selling book, to the script, to now the studio level with an A-list star attached, who's a good friend of mine. That's probably what I'm most proud of because I had my hands in every bit of the process. And that's what we really strive to do. It's very hard because things take forever and you don't really get to see the process through. You get it at certain pieces where, you're just happy to be a part of it. You hope that it works out and you hope that your money's protected, but when you really control the whole process, then you really can be proud of wherever it goes. And that's exactly what you guys are doing right now, I'm sure. You're starting at the beginning and you live it. It's like a marriage. You're living it for years. So I guess it's all relative to what, why you want to be in the business, right?
Very nice. For me, I would have to say the one I'm most proud of is, of course, the next one. There is one called Bite Size. It's actually a documentary. I'm not necessarily, I hadn't been before in the documentary world, but there's a film called Bite Size that I came on and helped, and it's a film about childhood obesity. It follows 4 kids around the world, or around the country, I should say, with different backgrounds, socioeconomic levels, and their fight and in most times victory with combating the societal and health implications of being obese as a child. So it's called Bite Size. Really, really excited about that. That'll be coming out later this year. And then the next project I'm working on is a very interesting kind of, we're bringing tech. One of the reasons I travel a lot is we're bringing tech to small developing countries, especially Africa. We just had a big U.S.-Africa summit in D.C., which most people probably didn't hear about because of Ebola. But one of the things we're doing is we're covering the process of that and actually making a documentary as well as a narrative feature about that process and a lot of the stories that come out of developing countries that aren't told.
I want to mention a project that I was a producer on for a little bit of relevance in this whole idea that it can be so difficult to raise money. The director that I work with now, his first feature, like a lot of you, he made a short film that had won 2 or 3 awards at some pretty good festivals, and he was taking acting classes as well at a group here called Playhouse West, which you may have heard of. James Franco was big in the Playhouse West, and he met this actress, and they were talking about their lives and how they, nothing was happening with their acting careers, and they really liked to do something, and they said, well, let's make a movie, and they started talking about her life, and she'd gone through this breakup and a bunch of different things that happened, and they thought it would be interesting as a movie, and so they had all their friends that they were all also acting with, and they were learning this, improvisational technique, so they decided to kind of make a movie about her life, fictionalized obviously, with some of the people that were actually in her life, who were these actors, and this was back in '99, and they bought 2 Canon XL1s. The director, who's not a shooter, was shooting with 1 camera. They had a friend that he had met when he was in college, who had the other camera, who was also the editor and the composer. Those were the 2 crew members for their whole feature. For like a year and a half or 2 years, they shot this improvisational movie. There was never a written script. I don't even know if there was really ever an outline. And at the end of the process, maybe they spent $3,000. They never had $3,000 at one time. They just, and a lot of that money was they flew to Houston. They lived in LA, but they flew to Houston to do some shooting at her aunt's house or whatever. And they came back and they submitted it to us Next Wave, and we really liked it. And we said we want to give you finishing funds, and we showed it at Sundance, and it got in dramatic competition in 2001 with films that. Donnie Darko was in dramatic competition that year, and this was a film made by nobodies. There wasn't a script, there was no money, there was a 2-man crew, there was no sound person, no makeup, no lighting crew, no lights. And that film got picked up out of Sundance by Lot 47, was released theatrically. There's a sad story at the end where Lot 47 goes out of business and they don't get on, the film's never been on DVD, but the idea being that there are these other ways to do it, you know, and if you're talented, don't let all these walls like stop you from trying to make something.
I have a huge Italian family, like I said earlier. My cousin Philomena married a guy named Steve Miner, who was a big director in the 80s and 90s. And I grew up in East Boston, right outside the airport. Doesn't get any less glamorous. Looking at, you know, I'm as short as I am and have asthma probably because the planes dump fuel on me every day for my entire life. But I will say this, just to take the humor out of it. My cousin married Steve. They lived in Hollywood. It was a big deal. So as a kid who grew up in East Boston in this apartment building, where there's, I mean, it's like Southie, like you saw in Good Will Hunting. We're rival cities, East Boston and South Boston. So nothing really great comes out of there that doesn't say get into politics or become, you know, you become a cop or in construction, and that's a big deal. So I remember my cousin marrying him, and I remember I had the ability, he came to visit. So I met him a couple times, and it was like, wow, you know, I could be in Hollywood if my cousin married a guy that's that close to home. It didn't matter where you were from or where, you know, I saw the ability to be there. So when I turned 16 and I started, I was running a .com that I started in the 90s, just by typing up stuff that interested me, movie reviews, sporting events, things like that. And I remember telling my mom, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna call Steve and I'm gonna ask his advice. I had written a script that I wanted him to read. And I'm thinking, oh wow, I got to him pretty easy, got through David, you know, I ended up finding him through David Gersh, because he had divorced my cousin at this time. So he wasn't my cousin anymore. And go through his agency, through David Gersh, you know, who owned the Gersh agency, and I was crazy enough to believe he'd respond. And because I was Steve's cousin, at some point he responded, sent my email to him in Sun Valley, Idaho, and he said, hey, he wants you to read a script. So now I'm thinking, holy shit, I made it. You know, I'm gonna make this movie. I'm gonna be famous, it's great. So I sent him the script, get it back like 4 weeks later, completely marked up and read it. Like, the one good thing I took from it was great characters, everything else was shit, right? So I'm like, oh, this sucks. So I get him on the phone, I go, hey Steve, yeah, this doesn't work for me. How do we make a movie? This was back when movies got made a lot easier than they do now. I said, I hate waiting for people. I can't wait for this to be marked up by 50 other people. So he said, well, if you got that type of personality, you just have to make it yourself. You gotta be a producer. So that's the moment where I knew I was gonna be a producer at 16, because I knew I wasn't gonna wait for other people to tell me what they thought was good. I was gonna go and do it myself and keep doing it until I got it made. So that was my inspirational moment. Never got another link of help from him. He ended up auditioning for a couple movies I worked on later. We're still great friends, and we're trying to work on some projects now. But the key is, for me, to be a kid from East Boston and realize that, wow, I could be there. It's one phone call away. And back then, there was no internet. There was no connection to the people that we are connected to now. It's so much easier. So that's my inspiration to you to say, if I could do it then, as a kid from East Boston, then in the age that we're now, pretty much anybody can get into the business and be successful.
So we've got maybe
Two or three, I think one more question, so I'll just take you switch so fast.
Real quick, the minimum guarantee letter from a distributor, who's that to?
Generally, the producers or whoever owns the IP, it would be, hey, I like your movie. For our distribution company, if I'm giving you a minimum guarantee letter, then it's probably a completed project, or it's what we call a backstop deal, where we're saying, okay, you haven't shot this yet, but you have all the pieces. These happen much less, but we're saying, okay, I'm gonna give you a minimum guarantee of X amount of money up front, so I can control the rights before it ever gets released. Before you go to a film festival where I have to compete with every other distributor, for the most part, the minimum guarantee letter is, your whole package is something that I want to distribute. Here's money that I'm gonna risk up front to acquire the rights to distribute this movie from you, and it goes to the people who own the movie who are producing it.
Great. All right, so listen, I want to thank all of you guys for helping us with this question.